So a couple of weeks ago, a colleague of mine introduced me to an Instagram account called Change the Museum. And Change the Museum is a response to a response to a response. Now, if you're not up to speed with what's going on in the museum field, after the BLM protests last summer, after there was a lot of traction with that civil rights movement, still ongoing of course, still lots of work to be done, but at the time a lot of cultural institutions and a lot of museums put out pro-BLM messages. Now, I think that that's a really good thing. I think it's important to put out your vision and mission statements, especially when it comes to big cultural shifts from within organizations. So if you want to change how race and racism are addressed in the organization, make that known. That's how you get held to account. Now, these diversity and inclusion themed mission statements are an important place to start. But what a lot of museum professionals started to notice was that the higher ups, the boards, the C-suite, anyone with director in their title, anyone who could really start to make a change in the museum were, one, mostly all white, and two, were playing by a completely different set of rules than people who were on that non-leadership professional tier of workers in the museum, and even less so the people who are working janitorial, security, visitor services, any of those frontline jobs. So because we're in a pandemic right now, everything is being dialed up to the extreme. And what we're seeing are big gaps in equity within the museum field. And this is after all those big, bold diversity statements, which you want to see, but then as the summer, fall, and time rolls on, what we're seeing are people being laid off disproportionately, people of color being laid off, people who are lower on the staff hierarchy being laid off in order to maintain operating costs, as if cutting their little salaries are what's draining the pot. Now, those are all pandemic themed ideas. There's also this secondary subsection which mostly has to do with microaggressions or just straight up racial aggressions in the workplace that aren't being addressed and also definitely fall under that diversity and inclusion category. And even though a lot of these professionals want to bring this up to HR, want to bring this up to leadership, they do and they're ignored, or they do and they're told to give leadership a chance to do better, or they do and a report isn't written, or they do and they're brushed off. So what this Instagram is a collection of these stories of either transgressions or flagrant racism or equity breaches or any other way in which the museum refuses to live up to the ideals that they like to tell the public that they have. It's a way to correct public image of the museum and hold people to account by basically fixing the public image to match what's actually going on behind closed doors, because they've already tried to talk to leadership. Leadership isn't listening. So what they're doing is they're bringing their grievances out in the air, letting audiences know here's what's going on, and even in a couple of cases letting potential employees know this is a bad and toxic work environment and you don't want to work here. And that's really valuable both for potential donors, for potential visitors, potential employees, to know what they're getting into, especially since so much of the facade that museums put up, it has nothing to do with what's going on in the background. So my original idea for this video was that I was going to read off 6, 7, 8 of these stories and then talk about them a little bit and conclude. But as I was editing that video, I found myself growing increasingly uncomfortable with the idea of putting myself out there talking about racism in museums. Because here's the thing, I'm currently job hunting, and I realized how quick it was to jump from Chloe is reading someone else's complaints to Chloe might voice her own complaints about a workplace to Chloe might have complaints about us if we hire her. And that anxiety is very real. You know, at the moment, there's a lot of discourse and canceling, and you know, you don't want to end up on one of these Instagram accounts if you're leadership in a museum. And if you have a potential hire and you're looking at her resume and you do a quick Google search and the first thing that pops up is a video where she's talking about you know, all of these things that go wrong in museums, the last thing you want as leadership in a museum is to have your employees undermining all of the work that you're doing. So that's why I chickened out doing that video in that form at this time. However, that reaction in and of itself is very telling about how white supremacy perpetuates itself in people, even if they're trying to do the right thing. So you might be thinking, would you really want to work at one of these institutions that's so turbo racist that it ends up on an Instagram account? And no, I don't, but that's actually not what I'm afraid of. You know, a lot of people fall into one of two middle ground categories. You know, if we have on the extremes of either end, we've got the people who are really actively anti-racist, working really, really hard. That's their whole jam. Their social media is dedicated to it. Their work is dedicated to it. And then on the other end of things, you've got people who are like actively defining people of color out of fine art. That's like, those are the extremes. But what you have in the middle is, you know, complacency maybe on the center, this side, and then in progress over here. And the thing is, it's actually this whole middle section, the complacency and the still in progress, that actually spooks me when it comes to voicing my opinions. Because you're right, I don't really care what the people all the way over here have to say, and like, of course I want the people over here to approve of what I have to say, and I look up to them immensely, but they're not necessarily the ones who are hiring. I need a job. So looking at the middle section, these are the people who would be afraid that if I came to work for them, that I would start making videos and Instagram posts about just how bad the museum is, and I'd make some big expose about the workplace. And while that's a thing that I would never do, it doesn't really scan if I already made a video based on an Instagram where museum professionals post anonymously about racism after they've already gone to HR. So if you use the transitive property, right, it's just too easy to imagine that I would then turn around and make some expose about the museum that I currently work at. And this right here is how systemic white supremacy perpetuates itself even in people who want to resist. There are real consequences for speaking up against white supremacy, not even because of the turbo racists, but because of all the people in the middle who are scared of having the finger pointed at them next. So in this way, you have a lot of people who either in their heart of hearts side with the civil rights movements, or they want to speak out and feel like they can't. This is that reason why they feel like they can't, because there are steep penalties to white people who step out of line. Now, are these penalties as steep as people who are not white? No, absolutely not. It is always beneficial to be a member of the dominant class, whether that is, you know, gender, race, socioeconomics, rather than the person who is of that marginalized group. Don't get me wrong, but if you're choosing between more privilege and less privilege and knowingly doing the right thing, that's a hard choice to make. And this actually speaks to something in feminist circles that you see, that it's not enough to raise women up to be the equals of men. You actually have to make room at the table by making room at the table. Some men are going to have to give up some privilege in order that everybody can be equal, because that's what privilege means. It means actively and consistently choosing white over black, men over women, cis over trans, straight over gay, again and again and again. And if you stop privileging that group, it doesn't mean that they're the new marginalized group. It simply means that they're no longer chosen over all others. And that's actually what I find so backwards about people who are anti-affirmative action. Because when you're systemically privileged by society, it means that you were chosen, at least partly, at least, unconsciously, because you are white, male, cis, straight, etc. And that's basically a baseline societal affirmative action for these groups. And as long as we don't have affirmative action, then we are condoning affirmative action, in a way. So in that way, affirmative action is actually the fix to make things more equal, whereas society has stacked the deck. So as an example, I was recently taking a "How much privilege do you have?" quiz, and I saw the line, "I can be fairly sure, and others will not assume, that I didn't get this job just because of my race." And I know what they meant. I know that they mean affirmative action. Like, if I were black and I got a job, would they assume that I was the diversity hire? I mean, maybe. But the thing is that in a day-to-day basis and a generation-to-generation basis, yeah, I think that big and little and familial and personal decisions and opportunities have been influenced by the fact that I'm white. And the thing is, do I have any one opportunity because I'm white? No, but the collage that make up all my experiences and the collage that makes up my family tree going all the way back, white. The fact that my family's been to college for the last 4 generations starts with the GI Bill, which was specifically for white GIs. The fact that my grandparents and parents owned the houses that my parents and I were raised in has to do with the fact that during redlining, the only people in a lot of areas who could own houses were white, and also the federal loans that went to subsidizing and helping families, white families, buy homes added to the equity that white families had moving forward. And so they were able to continue financing homes, education, etc. Owning a home adds to the stability of a family. It's not the only factor, but when you look at large numbers and you look at the statistics in the modern day, these things are still hugely divided by race. So when I see my set of experiences and opportunities, I do see a cluster of white experiences and opportunities that I got, at least in part, because I'm white. And I wish that other people saw it the same way. I would encourage people to see their opportunities and other white people's opportunities as an extension of their race as much as it is of their personal effort. Because our narrative, our meritocracy narrative, says this is because you worked hard, when really we couldn't have gotten where we are without help from the government, from our parents, from privileging each other and promoting from within our own racial group. We are privileged at every level, and yeah, I've had a lot of opportunities because I'm white. And then it comes time to turn around and make sure that other groups are privileged as well. And the thing is, I'm not in a position to hire anyone. I'm looking for work. I'm currently earning $15,000 a year in DC. Now, does that excuse me? No. White supremacy is all around us. We live in it. We are steeped in it. And it is so subtle in how it influences what we do, how we say things, how we navigate these situations, especially for white people when there feels like there's a decision to either side with justice or to side with complacency and to get whatever benefits you get from complacency. You feel like I would speak up if only but weren't the consequences. Now, clearly, I had a little bit of that this weekend. And the first step is to think, why am I not living up to my core values. And that's a really important thing, both societally and interpersonally, but also in terms of living with yourself. If you continuously fail to live up to your ideals, that can drain you. And that's the insidious thing, is that systemic white supremacy rewards people who perpetuate it. And I honestly wish that I had a better way to conclude this video, because I don't have an answer. I still can't give potential employers the idea that I'm going to nitpick the internal private workings of an organization on a public forum, because I need a job. But I also want to challenge white supremacy, and here it is. So I guess my offering for this video is going to have to begin and end with the fact that when you notice yourself not living up to your ideals, stop and ask why, and think about the consequences, and realize that that hesitancy is perpetuated by and perpetuates white supremacy. So without further ado, let's take a look at some of these posts. I work at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, and the only reason I can think of as to why Mocha doesn't frequently appear on this account is that the institution has been in free fall so continuously and for so long that it's almost impossible to try to begin to describe the failures of leadership and lack of management. Still, it was a shock, even for Mocha, when a couple of weeks ago our Director of Human Resources quit via an all-staff email with the subject line, "I quit," and then cited in the body of his email a toxic workplace and a series of incidents and board-conducted investigations damning himself, the deputy director, and board of trustees. That, and now the hiring of a 5th director in just 12 years, maybe begins to describe the degree of tumult under which we are expected to operate. Okay, the way that that was phrased made me think that the board's investigation of him revealed that he was doing something wrong, but actually reading the article, and I'll link that below, reading the article, it makes clear that he was the one who was pushing for diversity initiatives, and they were the ones who were investigating him for unrelated things, trying to undermine his initiatives. Which is disgusting, because here you've got a person who's in a leadership position, but they're not on the board, and so they don't get to make the final calls. And because they don't get to make the final calls, they really only have as much power as they have, and they can do the very best that they can. But when the powers that be aren't on board, there's only so much you can do. At multiple points during a recent DEI reading club discussion, white colleagues opted to move the conversation to a lighter note when the topic became too challenging for their sensibilities. White allies. Rather than retreat, reflect on what made you feel uncomfortable in the first place. Your POC colleagues, along with their friends and family, do not always have the luxury to switch to a lighter note when the situation gets difficult. Yep. So here's the thing. Self-care is important. That doesn't excuse you from thinking through difficult topics in the first place. Self-care is for after, not during. I am a nationally celebrated, highly qualified woman of color who recently decided not to apply for a position at the Getty because of the toxic, racist environment I have learned about through Change the Museum. Thank you to everyone sharing your stories for protecting me from the trauma I would have inevitably also experienced. The Getty Museum currently has 19 open job listings. If they care at all about the museum's ability to recruit and retain the diverse human resources they desperately need to change their institutions with the times, leadership must get their act together quickly and acknowledge the harm that's already been done. So here we go, posting anonymously online is already making a difference.